A town so quiet, so tucked away in the hills of Georgia, that most folks forget it's even on the map. A town where the front doors don't lock until sundown, where porch lights glow soft like lullabies, and where people still say ma'am and sir with sincerity. This is Willow Ridge, a place that hadn't made headlines in decades, until the day its sheriff did something no one could have imagined. Not even the ones who knew her best. Her name was Miriam Knox, 44 years old, African-American, sharp-eyed, soft-spoken, the kind of woman whose mere presence could make grown men straighten up and children hush without a word. She wasn't loud, wasn't flashy, didn't need to be. Her authority wasn't in her badge. It was in her dignity. Quiet, unshakable, earned, not demanded. For nearly 10 years, she served as sheriff of Willow Ridge. And not once did she ever fire her weapon. She didn't curse. She didn't gossip. She didn't miss a damn thing. People didn't just respect her. They believed in her. She was more than a law enforcer. She was a pillar, a promise, someone who reminded you that justice could still wear a kind face. And at her side stood Dr. Leonard Knox, her husband of 17 years. The town vet, soft-spoken, always smiling. If Miriam was steel, Leonard was warm flan. Together, they were the picture of grace, of stability. They didn't have kids. Miriam used to say the town is my family. And in many ways, it truly was. But behind the polished badge and the peaceful front porch was a truth no one saw coming. A betrayal so deep it didn't just break Miriam Knox. It reconstructed her into something else entirely. That truth arrived in the form of a phone call. March. Cold, still air. Miriam was at home, curled on the sofa, chamomile tea in one hand, reading reports with the other. When the screen lit up, Celeste Graham, her baby sister, just 30, living 2 hours away in Atlanta. Celeste was always the wild one, the one who wore perfume thick like clouds and heels too high for small-town sidewalks. Miriam, in contrast, was order. Celeste was impulse. And on the other end of that call, a trembling voice. Miriam, I messed up. I lost my job. Trey kicked me out. I got nowhere else to go. Please, just for a little while. There wasn't a pause. There didn't need to be. Come home, Miriam said. We'll figure it out. And 2 days later, she did. Celeste arrived with 2 oversized suitcases and a head full of drama. She looked like she'd stepped out of a music video. Tight jeans, red lipstick, earrings that shimmered when she turned her head. Even barefoot, she glided. And Lord, did she know how to command attention. Miriam didn't blink. She welcomed her sister with open arms, made up the guest room, cooked dinner, slipped her $100 in cash for groceries, gas, whatever she needed. Because that's who Miriam was. Family first. Always. And for a while it felt almost nice. Like old times. Celeste helped out around the house. Did the dishes. Laughed at Leonard's dry dad jokes. Ran errands. Stayed up late watching movies while Miriam headed to bed, drained from her 14-hour shifts. It was harmless, right? But as the weeks passed, the air shifted. Miriam started noticing things, small things. The way Celeste's hand lingered just a second too long on Leonard's forearm at dinner. The way Leonard looked up too quickly when Celeste walked into a room. The shared glances, the long laughs, the excuses to be alone in the same space. Nothing direct, nothing she could prove. But you don't spend your life reading suspects without learning to read your own damn house. Still, Miriam told herself she was imagining it. She was tired, overworked. Celeste was family. Leonard was her husband. She trusted them both. Until one night, the kind of night that shatters a woman clean in half. A town meeting got canceled last minute. Miriam came home earlier than expected. She stepped in her house, quiet, too quiet. The lights were off downstairs, but a warm glow bled from the upstairs hallway. Then, a giggle. Soft, playful, familiar. She moved down the hallway like a ghost. The bedroom door, her bedroom door, was cracked open. She heard a whisper. She'd kill us if she found out. Celeste. Her voice. Low. Sultry. Too comfortable. Miriam didn't push the door open. Didn't barge in. Didn't scream. She just stood there, frozen. And something inside her, something ancient and sacred, split wide open. She turned, walked out her own house, got in her squad car, and drove. No sirens, no destination, just silence. By morning, she was back home, smiling, pouring coffee, Celeste in her sweatshirt, Leonard yawning like nothing had changed. But everything had changed. Miriam wasn't just a wife anymore. She was an investigator. And the case? Her own damn life. You know the saying, once a cop, always a cop. Well, in Miriam Knox's case, it became her last lifeline. Because when your heart has been shattered, when the people you love have turned your home into a stage for their betrayal, you don't just break. You investigate. And that's exactly what Miriam did. She kept everything the same on the outside. Same uniform, same routine, same calm kiss on Leonard's cheek, same careful smile at breakfast. But behind those watchful eyes, she was studying every single move. Celeste laughed a little too hard that morning, her voice sugary sweet. Leonard whistled as he poured dog kibble into their golden retriever's bowl. He hadn't whistled in months. Everything was just a little too perfect. Miriam didn't say a word, but inside, she was building a case. The days that followed were excruciating. Celeste floated around the house like a second wife, wearing Miriam's robe, borrowing her makeup, even slipping into an old college t-shirt like it was hers to wear. Leonard began showering later than usual, often right after Celeste. He shaved more closely, wore cologne again, picked up flowers for the kitchen table just because, and the way they spoke to each other? Low, casual, with little pauses of shared secrets between the lines. It wasn't guilt. It was comfort, and it was driving Miriam insane. So, she did what any seasoned sheriff would do. She set a trap. At the precinct, she checked out 2 pieces of equipment from the evidence locker. Untraceable, unnoticed, legal barely. The first, a motion-triggered nanny cam, disguised inside a hollowed-out hardcover book. The second, a tiny pinhole camera she tucked in a hallway vent facing the staircase. She told herself it wasn't spying. It was confirmation, because gut feelings don't hold up in court. But footage? Footage never lies. The first 2 days, the cameras caught nothing out of the ordinary. Celeste watching reality shows. Leonard dozing off with a half-finished crossword puzzle on his chest. Innocent, boring, maddeningly calm. Then came day 4. Miriam was away at a community town hall, scheduled to end around 10 p.m. But her cameras? They were home, watching, and what they captured, God help her. Celeste, barefoot, wearing a thin white t-shirt, no bra underneath, walked into the living room. She handed Leonard a glass of wine. He took it, without a word. She leaned in, whispered something into his ear. He laughed, not a polite chuckle, not a forced smile, a full, relaxed, joyful laugh. The kind of laugh Miriam hadn't heard from him in months, maybe years. Then, Celeste placed her hand gently on his knee. Leonard didn't flinch, didn't push her away, didn't look guilty. He just looked at her for a long, slow second. Then, the feed cut off. Back in her cruiser the next morning, Miriam watched that 30-second clip 12 times. No kissing, no nudity, no smoking gun. But that look said everything. It said, this isn't new. It said, I've made my choice. It said, I'm not sorry. And right then, something broke. Not like a twig, not like a snap, like ice cracking under slow pressure, deep cold, permanent. Still, Miriam didn't explode. She didn't scream. She didn't storm into her house with a gun drawn and her badge raised. She just kept playing the long game. Because that's what pros do. They wait. At home, Miriam watched her world crumble in slow motion. Celeste borrowed her jewelry, her shoes, her voice when answering the phone like it was her house. She wore Miriam's red dress, the one that went missing last week. Posted a photo on Instagram with a filter and a caption. Feeling myself today, kiss mark. In the reflection of the glass door, behind her, a faint outline. A man's shadow. Leonard's. That night, Miriam stood in her closet and stared at the space where the dress used to hang. And for the first time, she let herself say the words out loud. They're sleeping together. Not maybe. Not possibly. They are. But even then, she didn't act on impulse. Because Miriam Knox was never the kind of woman who snapped. No, she cracked. Cracked with cold precision. with clarity that stung sharper than grief. She needed more than proof. She needed a plan. And while Leonard laughed and Celeste danced through the house like it was a stage built for their affair, Miriam was already laying the groundwork for what would become one of the most shocking cases in Georgia state history. By the end of that week, she wasn't a wife anymore. Not really. She was an officer on a mission. And someone in that house was about to face the consequences, not just of infidelity, but of betrayal so personal, so venomous. The law didn't even have a word for it. If part 2 was the wound, then this was where the bleeding began. Because up to this point, Miriam Knox still held onto a fragment of something most women would have lost long ago. Hope. Hope that maybe she was wrong. That maybe the footage, the glances, the shadows, the missing dress were circumstantial. That maybe she was just tired, overworked, paranoid, traumatized by her own imagination. But Miriam wasn't built for denial. She was built for the truth. And the truth was about to stare her in the face so hard, it would erase every last flicker of doubt. The following evening, she didn't sleep. Instead, she sat in her office, lights low, security footage rolling across her screen like silent film reels from a horror movie. Clip after clip, fragments of intimacy that danced just outside the line of proof. Celeste reaching for Leonard's hand as they passed on the stairs. Leonard brushing his fingers through her curls like it was muscle memory. Shared wine glasses. Low conversations. Shadows moving too close for comfort. Nothing illegal, but everything unforgivable. And then, the video. It was taken on a Wednesday evening while Miriam was attending a department-wide training seminar 45 minutes out of town. She remembered that night clearly. She called Leonard around 7:15, told him not to wait up, said she'd probably grab food on the way back. She remembered his voice. "All good, babe. Me and Celeste will just find something to watch." He sounded normal. And yet, as the footage played, the lie peeled back like skin from a wound. Clip begins. Leonard sitting on the back patio, shirt unbuttoned. Celeste brings out a plate of cut watermelon, their favorite summer fruit. She feeds him a slice. He leans in, kisses her fingertips. Then, his hand brushes her thigh. She laughs. A slow, drawn-out, dangerous laugh. He whispers something into her ear. And this time, there was no cut to black. The feed kept rolling. They kissed. Full, deep, familiar. This wasn't new. This wasn't a drunken slip. This was rehearsed, practiced, repeated. Miriam closed her laptop without a word. And in that instant, her heart didn't just break. It calcified. That night, she stood in her kitchen staring at the coffee pot like it was an artifact from another life. She could still hear the laughter from upstairs. Celeste and Leonard playing house in her home. She didn't go up, didn't confront them, didn't shout or throw anything. She just stood there in the dark and whispered to herself. You knew, and you let it happen. But no more. Miriam Knox wasn't built to collapse. She was built to strike, and strike with precision. Over the next 2 days, she went into full law enforcement mode. She mapped out her entire house, blind spots, camera ranges, entry points. She logged patterns. Leonard's shower time, always 9:30 p.m. Celeste's Netflix binge hours, 10 p.m. to midnight. The 2 wine glasses left out in the sink. The scent of her own perfume sprayed on Celeste's wrist. She opened a spreadsheet titled Incident Log, and line by line, she filled it in. 8:47 p.m. Leonard pours Celeste wine. Smiling. 9:05 p.m. Celeste wearing my robe again. Says just comfy. 9:14 p.m. Leonard comments on Celeste's laugh. Says it's contagious. Each entry felt like a knife between the ribs. But Miriam didn't flinch. She recorded everything. Not because she needed to prove it anymore, but because she needed to remind herself she wasn't crazy. Then came the red line in her log. Friday, 10:37 p.m. Camera footage. Leonard and Celeste fully nude. Bedroom. On my side of the bed. No more whispers. No more implications. Just truth. Raw, grotesque, undeniable. And with that truth came the first real decision Miriam Knox would make as something other than sheriff. She went to the emergency supply closet downstairs, the one where she stored medical kits for the K9 units. Inside, gauze gloves, saline trauma shears, and a scalpel, sterilized, gleaming, untouched since the last time they had to operate on an injured bloodhound. She stared at it for a long time, held it in her hand like it was a question she hadn't asked yet. "Am I still the law?" she whispered. "Or am I just another woman broken?" The scalpel didn't answer, but her silence did. By Saturday, Miriam had made her decision. Not out of rage, not from passion, but from the most deadly emotion of all, clarity. Because betrayal doesn't always come in shouting matches or slammed doors. Sometimes it comes in silk robes and stolen glances, in borrowed jewelry, in shadows on an Instagram post. And when it does, it doesn't cut with fire, it cuts with ice. Miriam Knox wasn't going to confront them anymore. She wasn't going to beg. She wasn't going to argue. She was going to punish. The way only a betrayed woman with a badge and nothing left to lose truly can. Friday. The kind of Georgia evening where the cicadas hum like broken clocks and the porch lights glow soft, like the world's trying to lull you into believing everything is just fine. But not for Miriam Knox. No, for her, this night wasn't gentle. It was surgical. She spent the day at the station, tying up loose ends, answering emails, reviewing case logs. But her mind? Her mind was a storm. She didn't eat. She didn't sleep. She didn't blink unless she had to. At 8:45 p.m., she sat in her office alone, staring at the security footage from the night before. Again, Leonard on the patio, Celeste feeding him watermelon. He kissed her fingers. And Miriam? She sat with her hands folded neatly over her badge. No trembling, no tears, just a single whisper. That's enough. By 9:40 p.m., her cruiser pulled into the driveway. No sirens, no headlights. She'd changed out of her uniform. Now she wore plain jeans, a gray t-shirt, soft-soled sneakers. Nothing intimidating, nothing obvious. She didn't slam the car door, didn't stomp up the porch. She moved like a ghost, like a woman walking into the ruins of her own life. Inside, the house was quiet, the kind of quiet that knows it's guilty. The kitchen was dark, but from upstairs came music. Soft, slow jazz, something Marvin Gaye or Sod. And then laughter. Celeste's. Miriam walked down the hallway, past family photos, her wedding day, her academy graduation, a picture of her holding Celeste's hand on a high school stage. Each frame felt like a punch to the chest. At the base of the stairs, she paused. Light spilled from the half-open bedroom door. Shadows moved. Bodies. Undeniable. She stepped onto the first stair. Then another. Each footfall was a beat in a funeral march. Not for a marriage, not for a career. For her soul. At the top of the stairs, she reached the bedroom. She didn't knock. She didn't kick the door open. She pushed it gently. And what she saw, God, Leonard, naked, Celeste, naked, in her bed, on her sheets, laughing, as if it were a goddamn sitcom. No shame, no horror, just giggles and sweat and betrayal soaked into every fiber of the room. And Miriam? She didn't gasp, didn't scream, didn't cry. She just stood there, still, silent, seething. For one moment, the room froze. Then Celeste grabbed the sheet, clutching it to her chest. "Miriam, I didn't mean." Leonard scrambled for pants, his voice cracking. "Baby, please. It's not what it looks like." That's when Miriam finally spoke. Not loud, not shaken, just cold, steady, deadly. "Get your hands where I can see them." Leonard blinked. "What?" I said. And this time, her voice dropped into the tone she used on armed suspects. "Get your goddamn hands where I can see them." He obeyed. Reflex. Because somewhere in that spineless heart of his, he knew she wasn't bluffing. Miriam stepped forward, pulled out a pair of steel handcuffs from the back waistband of her jeans, snapped them around Leonard's wrists. He flinched. "Miriam, what are you doing? This is insane." "Oh, don't worry," she said. "I'm not going to shoot you." She turned, walked downstairs, opened the hallway closet, pulled out the emergency K9 med kit. Inside, sterile gloves, gauze, a scalpel, and trauma shears. Heavy duty, razor sharp. She returned to the bedroom like a surgeon entering an operating room. And neither of them could say a damn thing. Celeste screamed. Leonard's eyes went wide with horror. Miriam, don't please. But she wasn't listening anymore. Her voice, calm, even. You slept in my bed. You broke my vows. You desecrated my house. She stepped closer, and you destroyed my name. And without another word, she lowered the shears. The scream that followed wasn't human. It was primal, a sound that came from somewhere deeper than the throat, somewhere closer to hell. Blood soaked the sheets, splattered the walls, pooled in the carpet. Celeste ran, barefoot, wrapped in a bedsheet, shrieking down the hallway and out the front door into the night. Miriam? She didn't chase her. She stood there, breathing, still, even. Then she picked up her cell phone, dialed 911, her voice steady as a metronome. This is Sheriff Miriam Knox. There's been an assault at my residence. Victim is alive. I'm the one who did it. Send a unit. And she sat down, right there, on the edge of the bed, next to the man who used to be her husband. Hands stained red, eyes blank, soul cleaner than it felt in weeks. Outside, the sirens didn't wail. There was no raid, no guns drawn, because every cop in Willow Ridge knew the address. They knew the woman who lived there. She trained most of them, promoted half, and now they were about to arrest her. Deputy Kyle Freeman, her protege, her mentee, the man whose first promotion she'd signed personally, was the first to enter. He stood at the door, shaking. Sheriff Knox. She looked up at him quiet. Then she stood, turned around, and placed her hands behind her back. 3 words. Do your job. And with that, the arrest was made. But make no mistake, this wasn't a woman being taken down. This was a woman who had already made peace with her punishment. A woman who never lost control. She simply decided it was time to act. When they booked Miriam Knox into the county jail, the silence was suffocating. No one said a word. Not the rookie who took her fingerprints. Not the nurse who logged her vitals. Not even Deputy Kyle Freeman, the same man who had once called her the soul of Willow Ridge. She didn't fight. She didn't protest. She didn't flinch. She just stood there, covered in dried blood, her gray t-shirt stiff with it, as the world around her collapsed with eerie precision. They stripped her of everything. Her badge, her gun, her dignity. They gave her a holding cell with cold steel benches and air that smelled like bleach and old shame. She sat down slowly, and for the first time in 17 years, the woman who enforced the law was the one in chains. The news hit like a meteor. By sunrise, local radio stations were already spinning the headline like gospel. Breaking. Sheriff Miriam Knox arrested for assault. Victim identified as her husband, Dr. Leonard Knox. Condition, critical but stable. Within hours, whispers became roars. At the church, at the grocery store, at the diner where Miriam used to grab pie every Friday morning. Some were in disbelief. No way. That woman read bedtime stories at the elementary school. Others were smug. You give a woman too much power, she forgets where she came from. But most just asked the same thing. What the hell happened in that house? Leonard was rushed into emergency surgery. The injury was deemed intentional, not accidental. His prognosis? He would survive, but he'd never be the same again. Not physically, not emotionally, not as a man. And when the reporters came knocking, he said nothing, refused to press additional charges, refused to make a statement. Instead, he checked himself into a private psychiatric facility 2 counties over. He vanished, like a ghost ashamed of its own haunting. Celeste? She ran. Some said she caught a flight to California. Others claimed they saw her in Texas, barefoot and trembling, hiding behind oversized sunglasses. But no one in Willow Ridge saw her again. Not once. She betrayed the one person who would have burned the world to protect her, and now she was smoke in the wind. Meanwhile, Miriam stood before a judge 2 days later for her arraignment. The courtroom was packed, not with strangers, with neighbors, with parishioners, with teachers and mechanics and cafe owners, people who had once looked at her with reverence. And now they looked at her like a question no one knew how to answer. She didn't wear orange, not yet. Out of respect for her years of service, she'd been allowed to appear in civilian clothes. But her hair was pulled back tight. No muck-up, face unreadable. The judge, a man who had once shaken her hand after a community speech, read the charges aloud. 1 count aggravated assault with intent to maim. 1 count felony domestic violence. Possible sentence, up to 20 years. Then he asked, "How do you plead, Mrs. Knox?" She looked at him, then at the jury, then at the town that once called her hero. And she said, slowly, "Not guilty by reason of betrayal." A pause. Even the judge blinked. Then she added calmly, "Let the court know I didn't lose control. I made a decision." And that was the moment everything shifted, because for the first time since the blood dried, people saw her again. Not the sheriff, not the suspect, not the wife, but the woman. The one who had held the community together for over a decade. The one who had sacrificed everything, only to be gutted in the one place she called home. By the end of that week, her badge was officially revoked. Her career, over. Her house, a crime scene. Her marriage, a ruin soaked in blood and silence. And the town of Willow Ridge, it didn't know what to do. Some folks avoided her name like it was cursed. Others said it softly at night, like a prayer they didn't want answered. And a few, a rare few, still believed in her. He broke her. One woman whispered at the farmer's market. She didn't snap. She cracked. Miriam Knox, once the heartbeat of a quiet town, was now its most haunting mystery. And yet, in her silence, in her stillness, in the way she carried herself behind those bars, there was no shame. There was no begging. There was only one message left in her eyes. You cannot destroy a woman who has already buried the parts of herself that once begged for mercy. The moment the cell door slammed shut behind Miriam Knox, it echoed like a verdict carved into stone. Not the kind of verdict a court declares, but the kind a soul accepts when it realizes there's no going back. Prison, not the place for a former sheriff. Not the place for a woman who once walked free in every corner of her town with her head high and her badge gleaming. Now, she was inmate 34972. Nobody, no title, just an orange jumpsuit, a thin mattress, and a concrete cell that smelled like rust and resignation. Her cellmate was a wiry, sharp-jawed woman named Red, who snored like a freight train and didn't talk much. On the first night, she tossed Miriam a roll of toilet paper like she was handing over a weapon. "You're holding up," Red said gruff. Most ex-cops break faster. Miriam didn't respond. Didn't need to. Because inside, she wasn't breaking. She was shedding. She spent that first week in a fog, waking up before dawn, stripped, searched, escorted like livestock, fed food that didn't even try to taste like food. The worst part wasn't the noise, it was the silence. The silence after lights out, when the only thing left was your own breath, your own guilt, your own memories clawing at the inside of your skull. She tried to sleep, but every time she closed her eyes, she saw them. Leonard, Celeste, naked, laughing, in her bed, and then the sound, that scream, the one that started in Leonard's soul and never quite ended. By the second week, something inside her cracked. It happened during breakfast. A guard, young, smug, barked at her to move faster in the chow line. And Miriam? She flinched, not because she feared the man, but because for the first time she realized he didn't know who she was. To him, she wasn't the sheriff. She wasn't even Miriam. She was a number. She was nobody. She sat alone at the far end of the cafeteria, her food untouched, her hands clenched under the table. She thought about the badge that once gave her meaning, the house that once gave her peace, the man who once gave her love, and then ripped it from her like it meant nothing. But prison has a rhythm. It wears you down, then reshapes you, not with kindness, but with repetition. By the end of the first month, Miriam stopped trying to remember who she used to be. She started watching, listening, adapting. She learned the guards' routines, learned which inmates ran the laundry, which ones ran the gossip, which ones had wounds deeper than hers. She kept her space clean, her voice low, her head high. Some respected her, some resented her, but none messed with her, because even in Orange, Miriam Knox still looked like she was in charge. She took a job in the library, sorting returned books, organizing shelves. She volunteered for conflict mediation groups, sitting in circles with women who had stabbed husbands, robbed gas stations, left babies at fire stations. And she didn't judge them, because for the first time in her life, she understood them. They talked, slowly, cautiously, not because of who she had been, but because she listened. She never spoke of her case, but everyone knew. Still they talked. About betrayal, about loss, about the moment you realize no one is coming to save you. So you save yourself. One night, a young inmate named Latch, barely 22, face tattooed, voice like a cigarette burned too fast, sat across from Miriam and group. She leaned forward, lowered her voice, and asked, "Do you regret it?" The room froze. Miriam didn't answer right away. She folded the corner of her book, closed it gently, and she looked Latch in the eye. "I regret that I let them take that much from me before I finally stood up." Latch didn't speak, just nodded. And in that moment, Miriam didn't feel like a prisoner. She felt like a mirror. Letters started to arrive. Some from old colleagues, some from strangers, but most from women. "You were braver than I could ever be. You said what we've all felt. Thank you. You didn't just defend yourself. You defended all of us." She never replied. She wasn't here for applause. She was here for silence. Back in Willow Ridge, the world moved on. Her old house was sold. Leonard disappeared into a private clinic. No interviews. No social media. No second chances. Celeste vanished. Deleted. Like she never existed. Miriam never asked about them. She buried that part of her life like a body with no headstone. Not to forget. Not to forgive. Just to acknowledge it happened. And move forward. Because even in prison, a seed can still grow. A woman can still rise. Even from concrete. Even from ruin. Even from herself. It started with a white envelope. Plain. Unmarked. Tucked between the pages of a library book someone had forgotten to return. Their eyes were watching God. Miriam had seen 100 envelopes like it. But this one had her name on it. Just her name. Written in soft, slanted handwriting that pulled a chill up her spine. Because she hadn't seen that script in over 4 years. Back in her cell, alone, she waited until lights out before opening it. She sat on the edge of her bunk, the room heavy with breathing and silence. She peeled the envelope open slowly. Inside, a single sheet of line paper, and a signature at the bottom. Celeste. "Miriam, I know you'll probably tear this up. I wouldn't blame you, but I need to say something, and I have no right to call. So here it is. I'm sorry, not just for what happened that night, but for everything that led up to it. I used to think being the baby of the family meant I could never measure up. You were always the strong one, the smart one, the sheriff, long before you ever wore a badge. I admired you. I envied you. And deep down, I resented you. Leonard wasn't supposed to happen. I didn't go there intending to take anything from you. But when I saw how he looked at me, I let it happen. Because for once, I wanted to feel like the one being chosen. That doesn't make it right. That doesn't make it less disgusting. But it's the truth. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know I never hated you. I hated that I couldn't be you. Celeste. Asterisk. Miriam folded the letter in half. Then again, she didn't scream. She didn't cry. She didn't even sigh. She just sat there, the envelope in her lap, letting the words press against her skin like a bruise she no longer had the strength to hide. Then, quietly, she opened the drawer beneath her bunk. Inside was an old cigar box. She placed the letter beside a few childhood Polaroids, her academy pin, and the torn sleeve of the gray t-shirt she wore the night everything changed. Then she closed the box and let the silence wrap around her like a familiar coat. Weeks later, another envelope arrived. This one postmarked from a private mental health facility 2 counties over. Leonard. Miriam stared at the envelope for hours before opening it. She wasn't sure what scared her more, what he might say or what he wouldn't. Inside, a faded photograph. Their wedding day. She was smiling without effort. He was looking at her like she was the only woman on earth. It felt like fiction. It felt like it belonged to strangers. Then came the letter. Miriam, I don't know if you'll read this. I don't know if I even have the right to ask anything of you again. But I need to say this anyway. I've spent the last year trying to understand what I did. Not just the affair, but the years before that. The distance. The silence. The way I let myself become something less than your partner. You didn't fail me. I failed you. I didn't cheat because I stopped loving you. I cheated because I stopped loving myself. And I mistook her attention for something that could fill the hollow places I never told you about. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve this letter to be opened. But I wanted you to know I remember who you were. You were the best person I ever knew. And I broke that. I'm sorry. Leonard. Asterisk. She read it once, then twice, and then she tucked it into the same box. Not to hold on to it, not to heal, but to contain it like a wound that no longer bleeds but still itches in the dark. And with that, Miriam let the ghosts rest. Not forgiven, not forgotten, just acknowledged. Later that fall, she was asked to speak at a women's group. Former inmates, parolees, survivors, daughters of the broken and the brave. The topic? Resilience. Miriam almost said no, but then she remembered Latch, the inmates in her conflict groups, the letters from women who said they saw themselves in her story. So she went. She stood in front of a dozen folding chairs. Hands clasped, voice steady. I've made peace with the fact that some people will never forgive me. And I've made peace with the fact that I'll never fully forgive myself. But what I've learned is this. You can bury the truth for years. You can lie to others, to God, even to your own reflection. But sooner or later, the truth digs its way back up. And when it does, you either face it or you become it. Afterward, an older woman waited by the door. Gray hair, soft eyes, wrinkles like rivers carved by time. My husband cheated on me in '82, she said. I didn't cut anything off, but I sure thought about it. They both laughed. Quiet, broken, but real. And for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, Miriam laughed too. For years. That's how long Miriam Knox served before the parole board called her name. No fanfare, no speeches, just a clipboard and a nod. You've served half your sentence, the warden said. Clean record. Your mediation program dropped inmate conflicts by 12%. You're going home. She didn't cheer, didn't cry. She just nodded and whispered, I don't know where home is anymore. She left prison on a gray Thursday in April. The sky was heavy but dry. The train that carried her back to Willow Ridge rumbled beneath her seat like the hum of distant thunder. She stepped off the platform with a single duffel bag and a pair of worn walking shoes. No one was waiting, and somehow that felt right. The town hadn't changed much. The diner still had the flickering light above the door. The post office flag still drooped to the left, and the air still smelled like wet grass and gasoline. But the people had changed. Some stared, some looked away. A few nodded, stiffly, like they were unsure if they were allowed to remember her as something more than a mugshot. Outside the barber shop, an old man named Mr. Langston stood and tipped his hat. Glad you're back, Sheriff. Miriam smiled, soft and small. I'm not the sheriff anymore, Mr. Langston. He chuckled. Maybe not, but folks don't forget who protected them. Not really. She didn't go back to the house. It had been sold, painted over, erased. She rented a modest cabin just outside of town. 1 bedroom, a screened porch, and a quiet that settled into the bones like cold water. Her parole officer came once a month. He asked questions. She answered with respect and precision, as if the badge were still inside her, keeping time. She got a part-time job at the county library, repairing damaged books and organizing dusty archives. The librarian was hesitant at first. Everyone was. But Miriam showed up early, stayed late, didn't ask for trust. She earned it again. By week 6, even the most skeptical staff members nodded when she passed. By month 3, they asked her to lock up. Then, one October afternoon, as she was shelving a stack of biographies in the back, she heard the soft chime of the front door. She didn't think much of it, until a voice echoed down the aisle. Excuse me, is Sheriff Knox here? Miriam stepped out. At the counter stood a woman in her mid-30s. Glasses, tailored coat. She didn't look like she was from Willow Ridge anymore. But something in her eyes felt familiar. I'm not the sheriff anymore, Miriam said carefully. The woman smiled gently. You were when it mattered. A pause. You don't remember me, do you? Miriam shook her head. My name's Alondra Hayes. Back in '99, I was 13. You found me behind that gas station off Route 14. I'd run away from home. My stepfather. She paused. He wasn't kind. The memory hit like a sudden downpour. Rain. A dumpster. A girl shivering in a hoodie 2 sizes too big. You were the one who convinced me to testify. Alondra continued. You sat with me in court. You told me. You don't have to be brave all the time. Just long enough to do the right thing. Miriam felt her throat tighten. Alondra pulled out a laminated school ID. I'm a guidance counselor now. Savannah. I work with girls like I used to be. She stepped forward. You saved me. I wouldn't be here if it weren't for you. Miriam didn't speak. Couldn't. She just nodded, lips trembling, and watched as another piece of herself slowly, gently, came back. That winter, another knock came, this time on her cabin door. A young woman named Monica, holding a letter and wearing a name Miriam hadn't heard in years. My mother was Latch. She kept this for you. The letter was one Miriam had written in prison. Words she'd poured into the darkness when she didn't know if she'd ever be heard again. My mama said you were the first person who ever told her she was still worth saving, Monica said. And in that moment, Miriam did the only thing she knew how. She opened her arms, and she held the girl, longer than she thought she needed to. She never remarried, never left town, never saw Leonard again, never looked for Celeste. People would ask why. She always said, closure isn't something you get. It's something you decide to stop chasing. Years passed. She turned 50 in silence, planted a small garden out back, tomatoes, basil, lavender. When asked why lavender, she'd smile. Because it grows even from broken ground. The town began to soften. The librarian invited her to Thanksgiving. The high school teacher asked her to speak to their senior class. Even the sheriff's department, new faces, new uniforms, started using mediation programs she'd written behind bars. She never asked for credit. She just nodded. Sometimes, when no one was looking, she smiled. Years later, when the obituary finally ran, it didn't make national headlines. There were no flashing cameras, number 60-minute specials, just a quiet line in the Willow Ridge Gazette. Miriam Knox, former sheriff, passed peacefully at home. She served her community, endured its judgment, and lived out her days with quiet strength. That was it. No mention of the trial. No mention of the shears. No mention of the night that changed everything. But for the people of Willow Ridge, especially the ones who remembered who she was before, that simple obituary said more than enough. She died in her sleep at 67. Alone. No husband beside her. No sister waiting to make amends. No badge pinned to her chest. But in the cabin behind the church where she'd once been whispered about, there bloomed a patch of lavender, fragrant and defiant, planted by her own hands. Because even broken ground can grow something good. The funeral was quiet, but full. Not with dignitaries. Not with sheriffs in dress blues. With women. Women she had listened to behind prison walls. Girls she had rescued from monsters. Neighbors who once avoided her eyes and now couldn't stop crying. They didn't speak about the blood. They didn't speak about the scandal. They spoke about courage. About justice. About how Miriam Knox never once asked for permission to do the right thing. She just did it. One woman stood in the back of the church. Mid-40s. Braids pulled back. A deputy's badge pinned to her chest. When the pastor opened the floor for memories, she stepped forward. She taught me that justice isn't always clean. That sometimes it takes a broken woman to show the world what real justice looks like. Silence. Then applause, soft, unsure but real. They buried her under the old oak tree behind the chapel. On her gravestone, just 5 words. She did what she had to. But that's not where her story ends. Not really. Because one warm spring day, years after the whispers had faded, a woman arrived at the chapel cemetery. Her name was Monica Hughes. She wasn't from town, but she walked with purpose. At her side, a little girl, maybe 6 or 7, wearing a denim jacket and clutching a small bouquet of lavender. They walked past the graves, through dappled sunlight and rustling leaves, until they reached Miriam's headstone. The little girl tilted her head. "Mama, who is she?" Monica knelt beside her daughter and brushed a curl from the girl's eyes. "She was the first person who told your grandma she mattered. And without her, I wouldn't be standing here, and neither would you. The little girl stared at the stone, reading slowly. She did what she had to. Was she in trouble? Monica nodded. Yes, but not the kind you run from. The kind you face when no one else will. The girl didn't speak, just stepped forward and placed the lavender gently on the grass. Then she turned back, slipped her hand into her mother's, and together they walked away. In Monica's coat pocket was a folded letter, yellowed, creased, once written by Miriam to a woman named Latch, long ago, behind concrete and steel. A letter that said, "The world may never understand us, but it will remember we were here." And as they disappeared down the gravel path, the patch of lavender behind Miriam Knox's grave swayed in the breeze like a silent promise. That justice isn't always clean. That love doesn't always heal. And that some women, even when broken, still stand tall enough to change everything.